And I remember when we were first starting the company, and maybe 5 years into the company, we were hitting our numbers. And we brought in a broker from Cushman & Wakefield, and he opened up our New Haven office. And I'll never forget Fred turning around to me after looking at our numbers and saying, "You know what? You don't aim high enough. You're doing great, but you don't aim high enough." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, studies have shown that, Mark, if you think you're going to make X amount, put X times 0.5. And traditionally, people are going to hit that." And I'll never forget doing that. And we elevated ourselves almost immediately because our expectations were what we thought were beyond reach, but were really very much in reach.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Powers, and I want to thank you for joining me on the Fort Podcast today. This show is an open-ended discussion and journey covering real estate, business, entrepreneurship, and investing. I would love to hear from you by tweeting me at Fort Worth Chris on Twitter. Hey guys, it's Chris. Thank you for joining me again today for an episode of The Fort. Really pumped to have Mark Duclos with me today. Mark is the co-founder and president at Sentry Commercial, which is based up in Hartford, Connecticut. He's also the president of SIOR, which is the Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, which he's been a member of for 17 years, and they're a global organization. So we have a lot to talk about around there. Sentry is a leader in the Hartford and Western Massachusetts area, focused on brokerage, property management, and construction management, but has a national footprint doing deals in industrial, office, and multifamily. So enjoy. Mark, welcome to the show today. Thanks for being on with me.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Can we just start off with kind of the 2-minute Cliff Note version of your story and what brought you to today?
Oh, boy, sure. So I've been in this business for roughly 34 years now. I got in it essentially because I was originally a banker. Last job in banking was Citibank, and I wanted to get into commercial lending. That didn't happen. So I, by mistake, got into commercial real estate. And that was back in 1991, and that was back in 1986. We started our company in 1991, and we've evolved from a local company that did brokerage into a company that does brokerage and property management and construction management. And actually, we set up a separate residential arm just before the coronavirus crisis hit. So I'm a Hartford kid and born and raised, and that's essentially where we do our business, which is in Connecticut and Western Massachusetts. That's about where all of our clients are based, and we do their real estate for them all over the place.
So you didn't become a banker, and then did you get it? Was your first foray into real estate on the brokerage side?
Yeah, so it was actually on the development side. So I worked for a local developer who happened to be the largest private landowner in the state of Connecticut. And that's where I got my start. The reason why I got into brokerage was I was doing sales and leasing for them, and it was then mostly leasing. And it became clear that I really didn't want to just represent one property. I kind of wanted to look at the region. It was tough to get people just to come to one property.
Yep. You're the president and co-founder of Sentry Commercial. Is that what you started in 1991?
Yeah, so my partner passed, unfortunately, 7 or 8 years ago, and Peter Gutterman, and a mentor for a number of years. We decided to go into business together, and that was in 91, and that was primarily absolutely brokerage. We were actually known as a brokerage company really up till just the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay. What kind of gave you the nudge to break off from the development company and start your business?
It was, so I went from representing working for this developer, what's called now Griffin Industrial Realty. I went from them and I went to work for a local brokerage company called Farley Company, which is now CB Richard Ellis. And so that's where I started with them. I think it was in 1987 or 1988. I also worked for a company called Hart Corporation, which is now was folded into Newmark Knight Frank. And then kind of have an idea of the way I wanted to do business. And the general platform and the way brokerage was done back in the late 80s, early 90s was pretty much set in stone. So if you really wanted to do it a different way, you pretty much had to do it on your own. And that was the impetus. I tried to do things within the culture of the existing company, great company, but it was a strong culture, wasn't able to do it. So you know what? Let's step out and do it yourself.
What did you want to do differently back in 91?
So I'd seen the evolution of the computer, frankly, and that sounds really stupid. Like, really? Einstein.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't. Really, the evolution. So we started the company, and we had these. I had an Apple computer, and it was one of those big original block Apple computers, right? And so I've got that. And as we grow, another one's got an Apple computer on their desk, and another one's got one on their desk. And oh, by the way, they started getting networked, right? And you start looking at that. You go, well, if all this information is being networked, and I've got information on my desktop, and they got information on their desktop, and then their desktop. Why don't we just share the information? Because at some point, the information is really what's going to drive your company. But we're in an environment, the brokerage world, and still the brokerage world, to a great extent, although lesser extent, is a very individual business, right? That's changed certainly over the years. But my idea was, listen, if I've got information over here, why don't we share the information, collaborate, and use that to our advantage and leverage it? And so that was the core difference of our culture, and continues to be the core difference in our culture. Total collaboration, collaboration of people, collaboration of information, collaboration of data.
Yep. I love it. Yeah, that's always kind of been I don't know if it's a stigma around brokerage. It seems like there's some companies where even though you work at the same company, like you said, you're kind of an individualist. And then like what you said, the collaboration component is a huge differentiator. I know a lot of great companies, but the brokers kind of work in silos. And I often wonder how that could be.
It's really difficult, right? It's difficult. And when I tried to make that change within the company I was at, they were willing to do it, but it really became clear, to your point, the culture of the company was so strong that they've continued to operate in silos. It's tough to break that mode. To the credit of a lot, they are starting to break that mode. They are starting to collaborate more than they used to.
Y'all focus on industrial, office, and then, as you mentioned, recently got into multifamily right before the coronavirus. What markets do you operate in? Is it all in Connecticut, or are you in other states?
Well, our clients are based typically, not all, but typically they're in Southern New England. And so when I say Southern New England, you're talking about Western Massachusetts, maybe somewhat up into a little bit into Central Massachusetts, but all the way through Connecticut, not for the most part, not including Fairfield County. So while our clients are there, we will represent their real estate needs just about anywhere, right? And we use the SIOR network substantially to do that, and we can get into that as we go. But so our clients are based in our region for the most part, but our services are not just Southern New England based. They're based all over the country.
Right. I love it. I think you might remember when we first met on the phone, I lived in West Hartford for 1 year. I went to King Phillips was the middle school. I went to, I think, King Philip or King Phillips. So I have a little spot in my heart for Connecticut.
I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
So King Phillips, where I'm standing right now in my home office, is probably 2 miles on a crow's fly.
Wow.
From me. Yep.
Go King Phillips.
There you go. Great.
I went to sixth grade there. Never forget it.
It's a great school.
Yep. So what is going on in the Western Massachusetts, Connecticut markets right now? Maybe if you could just do a little highlight on how those markets are doing, and then maybe as it relates to the asset classes that y'all advise on and broker in and provide construction management and property management services to.
Yeah. Listen, so I get around a little bit, and I would say, when I say get around a little bit, I'm on a lot of Zoom calls throughout the world. I'm on a lot of these kind of calls and talking to people that, you're at Fort Worth and learning more about Fort Worth, as we were talking about. Get a good view a couple of weeks ago into San Antonio. I was down in Dallas last week. And the reason why I preface it that way, I think what we're doing here in Connecticut and Western Mass is very much reflective of what's going on throughout the country. obviously on a much smaller scale. So, when you look at a Dallas market and what's going on industrially in Dallas, or if you look at what's going on office-wise in Dallas, we're not at the scale they are from a raw square footage standpoint, but from a relative standpoint, we're seeing some good things. Now, the industrial world is certainly seeing a lot more good things than the office world. Right now, the industrial world here, when I look at it from two different perspectives. I look at what I call the e-commerce and logistics perspective, and then I look at the rest, right? Then I look at the manufacturing and what I'll call more the local market. And then on the e-commerce side, we are in the logistics side. New England is still a very heavily populated but densely populated area. And in spite of what everybody hears, everybody flocking out of the state of Connecticut, that's somewhat true, but not everybody. And so e-commerce companies and logistics firms have big needs to be here because they're serving a good-sized population. And we're seeing the Amazons and the Home Depots and the Targets and the Lowe's and all increasing their footprint here. On the industrial side, as it relates to the manufacturing or the local market, certainly when I talk about local market, I mean local industries, we're being negatively affected by the commercial aerospace world. Commercial aerospace is a strong industry in our area, as is hospitality, events planning, and things like that. So the big one here would be aerospace, and aerospace is a big question mark right now. The military aerospace firms are doing fine. The commercial aerospace firms are not, and they're looking out 18 months to 2 years before they are. So those markets you would think right now are challenged, what I'll call, again, the local market, but they're actually right now doing okay. A little bit concerned about what that looks like in another quarter or 2 quarters, but we'll see. In the office world, overall, the office is very quiet. No real big lease transactions being done. A lot of smaller and medium-sized transactions being done. Vacancy rates have held up reasonably well, although when you go to Fairfield County had a negative 600,000 square foot absorption number in the second quarter of this year. So that's not a good thing, right? It's going to be very tough to backfill those. So again, the smaller to medium-sized markets doing okay. Certainly shorter-term leases, lease renewals are shorter term. There is more sublease space on the market. When you go into Fairfield County, yes, they had the 600,000 square foot negative absorption in the second quarter. But conversely, we're starting to see some companies starting to come out of New York City. Greenwich has been a benefactor of that, Stamford to a lesser extent. And certainly from a residential standpoint, there's been a sizable exodus out of New York into Connecticut. So I think those multifamily and single-family homes markets are doing reasonably well there. Overall, the residential world in the Connecticut and Western Mass market is actually doing pretty well.
That's awesome. You had mentioned that people might be reading that people are flocking out of Connecticut. Are they staying in New England, or are they moving across the country, or do you know?
Yeah. So I think it's all over, number one. Generally, it's down to the southeast, but that's generally. We do have plenty of people that go out to the Arizona region, and I'm not an expert on exactly what that migration is, but that's not a COVID crisis event. That's something that's been happening over the years. We happen to be in a high-tax region. And when you talk about the tri-state area, Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey, you're hitting on some of the 3 highest tax states in the country. And people are starting to feel, you know what, maybe it's time to go elsewhere. I'm not one of them, but yeah. And so it tends, again, to the lower cost and warmer regions.
And as it relates to office, I kind of fall in the camp that the office is going to be more important than it's ever been. I think people are starved for being around people and energy, and that's where people are mentored, and that's where culture is built. It's really hard to build a culture through Zoom. It's really hard to mentor, people that are graduating college or just coming up over Zoom. Do you have an opinion on, once we kind of get past the virus, is the office going to come back strong? Is there any permanent changes that you're seeing? Or like, if I had to say, where will office be in 12 months, where do you kind of fall in that camp?
Very mixed. And I'm not trying to cop out about it. So I'll give you a reason why. Number one, you really don't want to get your opinion on what the office market's going to be from an office broker, right? Because you're probably, it's got a little bias to it.
Yeah.
But I say that with a smile, with somewhat of a spark on my face. But I happen to be an industrial broker. But I think you're right. I think On one side, listen, everybody's really learning what culture means, and everybody understands it's nice to work out of your home, be able to work out of your home. I don't think people want to work out of their home all the time. I think companies do understand what culture really means now, and I think they understand that their culture will be challenged. I think that, you look at, I think there was a Google surveyed their employees. I think the results just came out yesterday. And the one thing that struck me in their survey for the employees about coming back to work or not, only 10% of their employees said they want to work at home full time. So 90%, I'm sure a good percentage of those were, I'd like to work at home and I'd like to work at work. I mean, they work at the traditional work. But I would say this too. I think that the office market that's going to be here next year, whatever it is, right? We all thought everybody was getting back into the offices in September and then it moved to January, now it moved to June. Who knows when that's going to be? But what that looks like, to me, is probably very similar to what it should have looked like before the COVID crisis, meaning the hybrid that we're talking about, sometime work at home, sometime work at the office. I think that should have been in place before anyway. Right? I think, right? I know I've worked since 1991 when we started the company. The rule of thumb was anything that you needed to do, that you could do in the office, you needed to be able to do out of the office. So technologically, we've always been set up to be able to work out of the house and at the office. And I really think that should have been predominantly the model back in February and years ago. So I do think that the market's probably get challenged a little bit. I did hear that law firms are starting to think about lower footprints. But again, I think that's probably something they could have looked at before the crisis. But I do think the only other variable that people are talking about is more room in offices, right? You're not going to be the 4 per thousand. You're going to be spreading out maybe a little more. Maybe not the 6 per thousand. You're going to be spreading out a little more. I think you are going to see that. So kind of one end, kind of a 50-50 kind of deal, probably more of a hybrid situation and probably more room in your offices. How that comes out on a square footage standpoint, I don't know.
We'll wait and find out. And maybe one more question on office. I know you have nationwide reach. I think for especially folks in Texas and probably others, New York City tends to get a lot of the attention and what's going on there. Do you think that, and you hear about, you had mentioned folks moving from New York to Connecticut. I've got friends that have moved their hedge funds from New York to Florida. Do you think New York City will come back stronger than ever, or do you think there might be more permanent damage in such a dense environment than people are maybe thinking about?
I think it's the latter. I don't worry about New York being a vibrant city, but I do think there is permanent damage done because of a number of things. And I don't want to get into the politics by any means, but there are there's been things that people have had to take a step back. Listen, I think the virus itself, people have taken a step back and kind of reflected on their values and what they want their life to look like. And fortunately, I think that's also probably matched up with some of their employers who have stepped back and said, well, why are we doing this? And I think that's where you're seeing the people flock to Connecticut and New York, and New Jersey and New York State, and saying, "Listen, I want a little more tame lifestyle." I think that part's permanent.
On industrial, you had just kind of broken it out into e-commerce and logistics, and then the rest. I just want to dial in on e-commerce and logistics for a little bit. I actually listened to this at a conference a couple of years ago, but it was for every $1 billion increase in sales online, there's about 1.25 square feet need for industrial. You had said that that's obviously kind of a highlight up there. Are you doing e-commerce deals right now? Are you starting to see a big influx of demand?
We are. We have seen the demand, and so for instance, we just did a 150-acre sale on behalf of Amazon, and they're putting up what they call a 1 million square foot facility. It's actually their 3.8 million square foot model.
Oh, wow.
And they've got a few different models, and then we also lease 400,000 square feet on behalf of Amazon. And there's been other transactions that have happened in the state of Connecticut just in the last 6 months with Amazon, and they're not the only player. Home Depot has come out with a new distribution facility system that was started before COVID. You're starting to see, you've got your Trader Joe's, and you've got all these. I could go on and on, right? Your Targets and Lowe's and so on. But yes, we're seeing that very much ratcheted up. The other thing that we're seeing is food quality distribution, as well as cold and freezer storage facilities. Ahold is, which is Stop and Shop, is putting up a 500,000 square foot freezer facility, a cooler freezer facility here in the region. Agrimark Dairy, which is at least about 250, 300,000 square feet in a new facility. So you're seeing it in a lot of different ways.
Wow. I had this questions and you kind of answered it, but I said, have you ever done a deal with Amazon? Obviously, they're the giant in the room, and they're very forward thinking. And Jeff Bezos always says the work that we're doing this quarter was done 2 years ago. You're just now hearing about it. Is there anything different about working with Amazon than anybody else? Are they, is there anything unique about working with them, or it's just another real estate deal?
There's a loaded. It could take a while to answer that one. They are unique. Now, they use a couple of firms for their service providers, and we, to be clear, work underneath those firms, as do a lot of other and a lot of other brokers in the markets. But so yes, you do a lot on the search side. You don't do a lot on the negotiation side. Basically, when you find this facility, our experience has been thank you, and then they complete the negotiations and do the deal. Their models change, so what you had as a model last year or 6 months ago might change completely in the middle of your search. So, they're constantly, as you just referenced Bezos, they're constantly changing, and they're constantly thinking and reacting to the markets. So what used to be a last mile distribution facility of 50,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet 2 years ago probably is about 150,000, 200,000 square feet today. Sortation centers, DCs, I think they have 3 different DC models. So they're unique. They keep you on your toes, and it's fun. I mean, it's fun because you get a little bit of insight in what's going on in the future.
Is that 3.8 million square foot? Is that all under one roof, or is that 3 million square foot buildings and a couple smaller ones, or do you know how that's broken out?
It's my understanding, and I've not seen one, so to be clear, but I believe it's number one, it's all under one roof, but the footprint of that building is closer to about 900,000 square feet.
Oh, wow.
It's the number, so you can see how many mezzanines or floors they have within the structure.
Incredible. Cool. Thank you.
It really is wild. An interesting one, too, just as a side note, I spoke to a SIOR, a good friend, who is a developer and is developing a facility up in Boston. And he said what's interesting there is while the e-commerce companies are doing very well and they're out leasing space, and these guys are developing 1 million square feet, he said that they're actually competing against life science companies up there. So life science companies up in Boston are booming. So again, the local industries are booming, and they're actually competing for space with Amazons and the other e-commerce companies. So he said, we've got a few proposals already on our 1 million square feet, and a couple of them are life science companies.
Wow. As it relates to Amazon and to e-commerce and everything else, are you involved in anything? A lot of the headlines the last couple months are that, Amazon might be looking at buying Sears or JCPenney and some of these defunct malls and converting them into distribution centers. Do you have any hand in that, or
I do not.
Okay, cool.
No, we don't have that. Yeah. One thing about Amazon, too, is they are very much split up into very definitive units. So, we might do business on one unit. We know nothing about many of the other units.
Got it.
That's going to be intriguing, though, to see how that plays out. It's going to be very intriguing to see what they do with these malls.
Yep. No, it is. I mean, I know 3 probably within 20 miles of my office that are probably 30% occupied and definitely need some life in them. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few years. All right. You're the president of SIOR, the Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, 3,400 members across the globe. I think I read 686 cities and 60 plus countries. What is SIOR, and why are you so involved with it?
Yeah, so SIOR, as you just said, Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, is a DC-based organization, 3,400 members and growing, all industrial and office specialists from throughout the world. We originally started back in World War II, finding facilities for the government, and that grew to what we see today. Its members, again, are specialists in industrial and office real estate. They're experienced, they're productive, and they're very high-end ethical brokers who do it the right way. And that's a big one. Using the word ethics is sometimes overused. But we like to think we've got the most experienced, we've got the best, and we have some really good people as members. And so why is it important? Well, there's a lot of reasons why it's important, but I think the SIOR at the end of your name says a lot about who you are individually. So while you don't have the time maybe to pull out your resume, we would hope when somebody sees on your business card, Mark Duclos, SIOR, they then have at least an understanding of the minimum standard person that they're working with. So that would be my first. The other is, as a local company, we need to do business for clients in other markets. And as I just said, when I see the SIOR at the back of somebody's name, when I go into that market looking for a broker to represent my client, my very special client that I want taken care of properly, I'm going to look for an SIOR to handle that business. SIOR doesn't go with your company name. It doesn't go, like we said, with the resume. It goes with a standard, and we look for that standard. And we do a lot of business. I mean, our original, for example, our original deal with Amazon was really through the SIOR network. And it's very important for me. It's very important for me from the standpoint of transactional, but it's first and foremost, again, that standard of what people tell us, say, you know what? Mark's got to be halfway decent. He's an SIOR.
Yeah. Okay. I love it. What? How do you become a member? Is it you just apply? Is there a certain amount of years you had to have worked in the industry? Like what gets you into SIOR?
Yeah, it's actually a raffle ticket. We throw them all in and to pull your name out. Yeah, no, I'm kidding.
Okay.
So you have to have a minimum of 5 years in the business. You have to have a standard of ethical behavior, and not just an ethical behavior from the standpoint of did you have an ethics violation, but what is your character? So there's an evaluation on your character as an individual and the way you do business. And then the other is that you have an educational standard as well. So you've got the years in the business, you've got a number of transactions that you've done 3 out of 4 years. You have to hit certain levels in your different markets. Every market has a different level depending upon size and such. You've got the ethical standard, and then you've got the educational standard.
And if you're a member, do y'all provide, besides a network, are y'all providing insight into data and things that members can get as being a part of SIOR?
We do, and we're doing a better job at that. I think one thing that this whole crisis has created is opportunity, and one of the opportunities for us is to be able to exchange information more fluidly, more efficiently, and that's happening. We, on a local basis, actually not even a local or national basis, I give you an understanding where SIOR is very much also about relationships. So it's not just becoming an SIOR and that's it. It's developing relationships. And to answer your question, one of the ways I get more information, whether it's locally within my own state or throughout the world, is I've got the ability to call a broker and say, you know what, I don't even know if I've got a client coming out your way, but guess what? Can you give me some information on what's going on in your market? I want the view from the street and I want the data. No problem. SIO to SIOR, it's done. I'm not sure if that's done in other situations. And like I said, our data, we're building much better data for our SIORs in whole to access from a database.
And then as far as it pertains to kind of your role as president, what is your role as president? And I'm assuming there's a lot of time spent. Is there a certain term that you're doing? And yeah, we'll start there.
You bet. So I'll go start from the last question there. So the term is typically a 1-year term as president. That's a little deceiving because as president of SIOR, global president, you start off as being elected by a committee, by a nominating committee to be vice president. And your term as vice president is for 1 year, and that puts you on the track to become president. So 1 year as a vice president, 1 year as a president-elect, 1 year as a president, and then 1 year as the immediate past president. So it's a 4-year commitment. But the actual term of president is 1 year. Now, to complicate the answer to that question is the COVID crisis, and we were all asked by the board of directors to stay around for another year to extend our term, and we've all agreed to do that. So my term actually as president will be for 2 years, ending October of next year. My role as president is really to work with the CEO and with my board of directors to ensure that SIOR is on the right track and doing the things that we're supposed to be doing to become an even better organization and to execute what we call the annual operating plan, which is driven by a 3-year strategic plan. So we do a 3-year strategic plan every 3 years, obviously, and then we have an annual operating plan that tells us how we're going to operate this year. And my job there is to make sure that the board is in tune and that the board is doing the things we need to make sure that we're executing those plans. I think outwardly, people look at the president as what I call the person that comes out to the chapters and to the conferences and to the regional conferences and all the events and shakes hands and kisses babies, as I put it, shaking hands and kissing babies. So we got a physical presence out in the marketplace where like I was down in Dallas last week at a chapter event, and I was met with chapter leadership for dinner the night before, and then we had the event in the morning, and I gave an address to the chapter telling us how SIOR is doing and what we're doing.
I love it. It sounds like a busy job, and I can imagine COVID has made it kind of interesting leading a global organization kind of over Zoom, and it sounds like starting to see events happen and people commingling again. But has this year been, have you learned something as a leader this year that maybe being in that position, SIOR kind of taught you?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've learned one lesson. That's a great question. If I had to narrow it down to one, I will say that my job as president of SIOR is so transferable into what I do with my company and what I do personally. We've learned at SIOR that, again, as I said, our reputation has always been very much and is very much a relationship business. We just have great relationships amongst us. And I think everybody felt that that's kind of what we did. And there were physical relationships. So there were relationships where you physically met people at conferences and so on. That's great. The problem is we also neglected to a certain extent the virtual presence, the online presence of SIOR. And that has allowed us to go back to our mission. And our mission, we have been reminded, is our mission is to really connect. It's to connect people with people with knowledge, people with markets, and people with opportunities. So it makes sense, right? It's not relationships, it's connecting people to people leads to relationships. That's been great. So we've taken a step back and we really looked at that. That's not a physical event and that's not a virtual event. It's whatever you need to do to connect people with those things. That's what we're doing. So a nice refocus and a great online presence. I would say I've learned those things and I've taken those very much back to our company and executed those things.
We met from our mutual friend, Grant Pruitt, and it was an article that Juniper Square had written about some of my thoughts on technology and its impact on real estate. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. How, maybe at the first question would just be, how does your business use technology and why is it kind of important as we move forward?
Yeah, and by the way, I saw Grant last week. I was in Dallas. He's doing well. It was great to see him. And Grant probably is one of the members that really exemplifies where we like seeing our SIO organization going. The people go very positive, very forward moving. So shout out to Grant and everything he does. But from a technological side, as I said earlier, when we started this company, it was very much based on the concept of technology, but using technology to execute our mission, which was to work collaboratively. And that the ultimate, our focus is to work collaboratively for the benefit of our clients. So everything for the benefit of our clients, and we believe that collaborative work benefits our clients. So with that, we use technology to be able to execute that mission. And so we had, CRMs, and I hate when we use CRMs because CRMs is such a light term for actually what a CRM is, right? That's transactional management, it's a comparable data, and it's things like that. And so that started off simply with that and your email, which I even forget what email was back then. So that started that in 1991, and that's evolved to a tech stack that we use to drive our business. And our tech stack includes a lot of things, not the least of which is Build Out and Rethink and CoStar and Microsoft Outlook 365 and those type of tools. We use those tools to going into the crisis. We use those tools. Coming out of the crisis, or as we're in the crisis, we use those tools more than ever. And that's really driven the success of the company. I can tell you that if we didn't have those tools coming in, I'm not sure what we look like today, but we don't look anywhere near what we look like today without those tools.
And kind of in our conversation we had a couple weeks ago, it's hard for me to imagine real estate, to set the stage. Real estate's been kind of a slower adopter to technology. And this kind of goes for a lot of industry, or pretty much every industry, but it's hard for me to imagine how real estate companies that are not thinking about their technology stack and incorporating into their business, how they're going to keep up as the world keeps moving, because it's moving faster and faster, day by day. And
it's a great disconnect, right? I mean, if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards, right? And that couldn't be more true today. To your point, right? You have the groups with technology, and let me underline, not that you just have technology, but they actually use it, and they use it as efficiently as possible. Those are just accelerating through this crisis. Those that aren't using it to the best of ability, or aren't using it at all. You got the great divide. It's becoming greater.
Yep. You can have the best software on the planet, but if you don't have a team that's bought in and a culture that's willing to accept technology and use it to their advantage, I think it's more important to have the team that's willing to do that than the software itself.
100%. 100%. And to give an example, we had tools in our toolbox, right, going into the crisis, and we were pretty proud of them, and we used them, and we should be proud of them. But then all of a sudden it became, okay, you know what? We got this wrench in the toolbox. Are we really using it to the biggest extent? Like, what else can this wrench do? And that's probably a very primitive example. But, we got tools in our toolbox. Are we really using them to the extent we can? Well, the answer was we weren't. And so we had, to your point, the culture that went into that toolbox. We looked at what those tools could do and started using them to the fullest extent. And it's been big. It's been a game changer.
It has been a game changer. I skipped over this a bit ago, but I wanted to just touch on it before we head into the final questions. But you launched a residential business before COVID. Why did you decide to get into residential?
So we've actually evolved from that. So we actually have a multifamily group that's now we folded into Sentry Commercial. So that's an actual division in Sentry Commercial. We've learned a few things. One of the reasons why we got into the residential side, so that is a separate company, of which I'm a partner in that company, was one of the big things is I am totally intrigued on how the residential world uses technology to drive their business. And to your point, I think the commercial world, even us, we're behind. And I'm really involved seeing the tools that they use and intrigued, and I would love to take those tools and put them in the commercial side of the business. So that was number one. I mean, we've learned a lot of things. I fortunately have a partner in that venture that did a lot of work and started Keller Williams in this market and knows what he's doing. And then another partner who came on board, and they're doing great stuff. But so the reasons why I got in originally were really the technological side.
I love it. All right, we're going to ask some personal questions. Do you have a morning routine or something that you do that gets your day started?
Oh, boy. Anybody that knows me knows that's a loaded question. I am a man of routine. And so one of the things going into this crisis, when you get thrown off your routine, you throw Mark off his routine, that's a problem. So, yes, I wake up between 3 and 3:30 every morning.
What?
Right? And I do. Sometimes 2:30. But most times between 3 and 3:30. I go grab my coffee. I come up to my office where I'm standing right now, and I work a couple of hours in my office, work through till about 6 o'clock. Well, my routine actually starts off with social media. And I start getting into my office and do the work there. And then about 6:30, I then kick off and start doing my workout. And that usually includes a walk with my wife. And then we have breakfast, and then I continue my day. So, yes, I'm very ritualistic and very, very much set in my ways from a routine standpoint.
I love that. You've done that your whole life, or something you learned to do kind of later in life?
When we started the company back in 1991, I knew when we did it, we were going to have to do an awful lot of catch up. And so what happened was that was also right in line with when my children were born. My daughter was born and my son was born pretty close thereafter. And the only way, and this is all candor, and I probably haven't said this story much publicly, but now that you asked, in all candor, my wife and I had a deal, which was, listen, I'm going to go 3 hard years here. We're probably not going to see each other much, but we're not going to let it affect the kids because I'm going to be around for dinner and all the things they need to do. But guess what? I'm probably working till 11 or 12 and getting up at 3 in the morning. So that's how it all started.
That was my final question. What time do you go to bed if you're waking up at 3 in the morning? You still go to bed at 11?
Well, no. So no, it depends. Go to sleep and go to bed are probably 2 different things. So when I'm on the road, I'm getting late, and that might change a little bit. But if I'm at home, I go to bed at 9:30, but I probably fall asleep at about 8:30.
Got it. I thought I got up early. I started getting up around 5:30, but I got a couple more hours. You got me beat by a couple hours.
Yeah, well, don't make it a competition because, quite candidly, I'm trying to get to your side of the clock, not mine.
What is the best advice that you've ever received? Business, personal, it could be anything.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I can't think of one single. But you know what? Let me first preface it, and I don't mean to do this just because, but I grew up in a family where mom and dad had very much set principles and standards, and so I learned the foundation of what I was doing clearly through them. My dad was extremely hard worker. My mom brought up 8 kids, and I'm one of 8 children, and so
wow.
I learned that working hard and being focused and staying positive was a very big part of it. I can tell you that I remember, I'll give one piece of advice that stuck in my mind. I remember when we were first starting the company, and maybe 5 years into the company, we were hitting our numbers. And we brought in a broker from Cushman & Wakefield, and he opened up our New Haven office. And I'll never forget Fred turning around to me after looking at our numbers and saying, you know what, you don't aim high enough. You're doing great, but you don't aim high enough. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, studies have shown that, Mark, if you think you're going to make, X amount, put X times 0.5. And traditionally, people are going to hit that. And I'll never forget doing that. And we elevated ourselves almost immediately because our expectations were what we thought were beyond reach, but were really very much in reach. So I'll attribute that one as one of the big pieces of advice I've received as running a company.
I love it. Aim high.
Yeah, aim high.
Is there a book you've read that's had an impact on you?
I would say I'm not a big book reader. I'm a big newspaper and periodical reader, but a very, very much a big newspaper reader. But I would say the one book that always sticks out in my mind was Never Eat Alone. And the art of establishing relationships and pinging and doing those things. I forget when that book came out, but that was one I actually to this day use an awful lot of the tips that they gave in that book to this day in my everyday business.
I love it. I've read that book.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I have to ask, what's a newspaper? We're in 2020. You still get those?
No, I will say I still read. The only paper I read, physical paper, is the Wall Street Journal. Everything else is online through my Feedly account. Did
you say Feedly?
Feedly, yes.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
That's a news aggregator.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. If there was a billboard on a major highway and you owned it and you could put anything on it for the world to know, what would you put on that billboard?
I would say that right off the top of my head would either be positive or stay positive. I believe attitudes coach a lot, and I think people worry about the result and they don't worry about the process to get to the result. And I think the result that process will always start off with being positive. And then the process happens after that. But I think if you're not positive, even in today's times, be positive and have a plan and execute the plan. So I would put it on a billboard on I-91 in Hartford, Connecticut. I would either say be positive or stay positive.
I love it, especially in today's environment. It's, being positive is a decision. It's something that you choose to do. And I have to say, even since the first time we've met, you have positive, you're always laughing, it radiates. So you're living your billboard.
Oh, thank you. And I think the one thing you just said, it's a choice. Attitude, I've got there's one on the side of my desk at the real office that says attitude is a choice. Make it a good one.
If people want to find Sentry or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it? Through social media, website? How can people reach you?
You know what? I have a ton of email, and I hate email. I get that I need it. I love phone calls. So I would just pick up a phone and call me at 860-983-5630. Again, 860-983-5630. And I love talking like this, and I love having ideas back and forth and collaborating. And we collaborate not just internally, but with everybody. So I'd love to hear from people.
Thank you very much. Mark, thank you so much for taking time with me today. It's going to be a great episode, and I know you're a busy man, so I really appreciate it.
This has been a pleasure, my pleasure. So thank you for the opportunity, Chris. Really appreciate it. Hopefully we keep this going and have further conversations.
Thanks, Mark.
Be good. Have a great weekend.
Hey everyone, it's Chris here again. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star rating, or write a quick review. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Chris Powers is the founder and CEO of Fort Capital LP. All opinions from Chris and guests of the Fort podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Fort Capital LP. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for real estate or investment decisions. The Fort with Chris Powers is produced by Straight Up Podcasts.